EVO. There are certain nights in American history that don't feel like time. They feel like a wound. The air gets heavy, sounds turn strange, the ordinary rituals of life, laughter and traffic and dishes and phones ringing, all that continues, but it begins to feel like a cruel performance. Because somewhere, in some room or hallway or street light lit corner of a city, something's building. April of 1968 is just like that. The country is exhausted in a way that exhaustion itself can't explain. Vietnam has become a grinding question with no clear answer. Cities are tense. Leaders speak in rehearsed phrases while the public lives in raw nerves. And beneath everything is a more dangerous truth. The moral argument about civil rights is becoming an economic argument about power. That shift matters. It matters because America could endure being challenged about manners, about segregation, about even the optics of cruelty. But what it couldn't endure, not comfortably, was being challenged about money, about wages, about housing, about the distribution of dignity. And in Memphis, Tennessee, that economic argument is no longer theoretical. It's written on cardboard signs carried through the streets. I am a man. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. comes to Memphis because he knows where history is heading. He knows the next chapter of justice, it won't be one with polite speeches alone. It'll be one where the country keeps its deepest secrets, in paychecks, in labor, in poverty. He speaks the night before he dies, a speech that sounds less like politics than prophecy. He talks about threats. He talks about the possibility of dying. He talks about reaching the mountaintop and seeing the promised land. People remember those lines as poetry. But poetry wasn't the point. The point was that a man can sometimes feel the weather changing. In a few chapters from now, we're going to reach the moment where the weather breaks on a motel balcony in Memphis, when the 20th century changes direction with a single shot. The moment where America's future stops being an idea and becomes a crime scene. Welcome back to the Ides of April. This is a show about the days when history stops acting like a concept and reveals itself as a living thing, violent, fragile, and permanent. Tonight, we begin a two-part series on the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., following the official narrative with careful respect for the facts, for the man, and for what his death did to the American soul. This is Memphis 1968, and it starts before the shot. Now, originally, I wanted to drop this series starting last week in honor of the national celebration of Martin Luther King Day. But the flu sniped me, man. I was down for the count. You can still hear it a little bit in my voice. But maybe, because everyone else was doing content last week about MLK, maybe there'll be a little bit more room for it this week. I hope so. So there's a poet I love who understood public grief as well as anyone. W.H. Auden. A writer who could describe loss not as sentiment, but actually as reality. He understood that tragedy doesn't pause the world. It fractures it while the world keeps moving. And that quiet cruelty, the contrast between the ordinary and the catastrophic, will shadow this entire story. Chapter 1. Memphis as a mirror. Memphis did not call Martin Luther King Jr. because it wanted a moment. Memphis called him because it needed a reckoning. In the public memory, King's movement is often reduced, tragically, into a single moral narrative. Segregation was wrong, discrimination was cruel, and America eventually corrected herself. But 1968 is not a victory lap. It's the moment the story begins to mutate into something even more dangerous to the nation's comfortable self-image. Because by 1968, King is no longer only speaking about civil rights. He's speaking about economic justice. He's speaking about poverty as a system, not as a symptom. And he's speaking about war, calling Vietnam not merely a geopolitical error, but a moral catastrophe. These positions widen the movement, they deepen the movement, and they sharpen it as well. And they also expand the number of people who want to see him silenced. Not because they disagree with his tone, but because they recognize what he's pointing at. The machinery. And in Memphis, that machinery has a face. It belongs to sanitation workers, black men who keep the city clean and functioning while being treated as disposable. Their job is to collect what everyone else wants to forget: garbage, waste, the evidence of daily life. And like so many jobs built on invisible labor, the men doing it are expected to be quiet about their pain. In February of '68, 2 sanitation workers, Echol and Robert Walker, are crushed to death in a garbage truck. Their deaths are sudden, brutal, and revealing. Because an accident like that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a world where equipment isn't maintained, where safety isn't prioritized, where working people are treated like replaceable parts. After the deaths, the workers do something that still feels revolutionary even now. They demand to be seen. They strike. They march. And when they march, their signs don't say, "Help us," or "Consider us," or "Please listen." Their signs say blatantly, "I am a man." It's one of the most devastating sentences ever written in the history of American protest because it doesn't ask for sympathy. It simply demands reality. It exposes the deepest crime of oppression, not violence, not insults, not segregation alone, but the denial of personhood. King arrives in Memphis with that understanding. This is not an optional issue. This is not adjacent to civil rights. It is civil rights in its purest form. Human beings demanding economic dignity in a nation that has mastered the art of extracting labor while withholding respect. But Memphis is not only a labor conflict. Memphis is also a city heavy with history, Southern power, racial hierarchy, old money, and the peculiar local tension that comes when an entire society feels its foundations shifting beneath its feet. The strike becomes a symbol not because King makes it one, but because America makes it one. The strike turns it into a mirror. In that mirror, the country sees something it has always struggled to admit, that its prosperity has a cost, and someone always pays it. King's presence intensifies everything, not because he's inflammatory, but because his moral clarity is freaking dangerous, man. Moral clarity forces decisions. It forces a society to pick a side, not abstractly or rhetorically, but materially. Support the workers, increase wages, recognize unions, invest in safety, treat men as human beings. That's the request. And the request is terrifying to those who benefit from the status quo because it implies a larger truth. If dignity is owed to sanitation workers, well, then dignity is owed to everyone. And if dignity is owed to everyone, then power cannot remain comfortably concentrated. There are moments in history where a single issue becomes a hinge. Memphis is that hinge, and King knows it. But he's tired by this point. People always forget the fatigue and the vulnerability, the human toll. King has been attacked publicly and privately. He's been threatened. He's under constant government surveillance. But he keeps moving forward because he believes, deeply, stubbornly, that justice is not merely a political necessity, but a spiritual one. And if you're looking maybe for a new angle that too few people hold in their mind, King in 1968 is not simply a civil rights leader. He is becoming, before the nation's eyes, a class justice leader. And that's the moment, historically, when the risk becomes terminal. Because civil rights can be tolerated as morality. Class justice threatens the architecture of the country. And Memphis is where those two currents meet. Race and labor, dignity and wages, America's dream and America's debt. It's not, in other words, a random place for history to happen. It is the exact kind of place where history always happens. where the hidden truth is finally forced into the daylight. And by April 3rd, the city feels charged. The streets are tense. The air has that pre-storm quiet where everything seems to be waiting. King is scheduled to speak at Mason Temple. The world's attention is drifting towards Memphis the way it drifts towards lightning. And in that charged atmosphere, there's a terrifying subtext to every moment. When you force a nation to confront itself, you don't only provoke change, you provoke fear. And fear always looks for a weapon. Chapter 2. The Mountaintop. If you want to understand why the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. still feels supernatural to people like me, not mystical but foreordained, you have to stand inside the speech he gave the night before he died. April 3rd, 1968, Mason Temple, Memphis, Tennessee. The crowd gathers with the kind of intensity that belongs to movements, not just events. And this isn't a rally for spectacle. It's a gathering of people who sense history bending. There's rain outside, hard rain, the kind that makes a city feel like it's drowning, submerged. King's late, he's exhausted, he almost doesn't want to make the speech. But then he does. And what emerges, man, it's not merely eloquence, it's something deeper. It's the sound of a man in full awareness of what his life has become. The speech is structured like scripture, and it moves like prophecy. It rises and falls with the rhythm of a church and the clarity of a political manifesto. And near the end, he says it. He talks about threats, he talks about longevity, he talks about the strange peace that comes when fear no longer has power because you have already accepted the price. And then the line, he has been to the mountaintop. He has seen the promised land. He might not get there with them. It's hard to listen to that today without feeling as though the universe was writing. But the truth is more human and more devastating. King knew his risk. He had been living with the knowledge for years that he was a target. The FBI surveillance wasn't subtle. Actually, it was obsessive. He received threats that would have driven most people into hiding. But he kept traveling, he kept speaking, he kept putting his body in public. And here in Memphis, he's doing it for something even more dangerous than civil rights as the country had previously defined it. He's doing it for workers, for wages, for poverty, for national redistribution of conscience. Auden once wrote, "In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark." It's one line, but it captures something essential. Darkness isn't only a lack of light. Darkness is an atmosphere of fear. And in fear, the world becomes loud with threats. Memphis is loud with threats. The city government doesn't want the strike empowered. Businesses don't want unions emboldened. And larger forces, political forces, don't want King evolving into the leader of a mass movement that links race, labor, and anti-war activism into one moral blade. After the speech, King returns to the Lorraine Motel. The Lorraine is no palace. It's not a grand historical building. What it is, in the way that so many tragedy sites are, is painfully ordinary. 2 stories, exterior corridors with the outside walkways, a pool, courtyard. It's a motel, the kind of place where people stay when they're traveling for work. The kind of place that should have disappeared into history as an unremarkable footnote. Instead, it's a landmark of national grief. On April 4th, the day unfolds like any day. Now that sounds simplistic, but it matters. The assassination is often remembered as this cinematic moment, an inevitable pivot. But before 6:01 p.m., the day is full of the mundane machinery of movement, meetings, calls, planning. King is in Memphis to support the workers. He's in Memphis to strategize. He's in Memphis to be, in the broadest sense, responsible. And then there's the quiet preparation for dinner. King plans to eat at the home of a local minister. Friends are present. Laughter drifts through the hallway. Someone makes a joke about clothes. Someone asks him to hurry. Someone tells him he looks good. These are the kind of details that crush you because they're so alive. This is what death steals. Not only the person, but the continuation of the ordinary. Across the street from the Lorraine Motel sits a different kind of architecture. A rooming house, a building where people rent space, the kind of building that isn't famous until it becomes infamous. The official narrative will later identify this as the point from which a shot is fired. A rifle, a bullet, a man named James Earl Ray connected through evidence and movement. But at this point in the story, no one knows any of that. King steps out onto the balcony corridor outside room 306. He leans on the railing. He looks out into the courtyard. He speaks to someone below. It's not a dramatic moment. It's a human moment. A man pausing between duties. What people often forget is that King died not in a battlefield, not in a riot, not in a moment of chaos. He died in a moment of ordinary life. And that's why it felt, to those who witnessed it, like a cosmic betrayal. Because you can accept death in war as brutal logic. You can accept death in conflict as consequence. But death in the middle of calm feels like a theft committed by the universe itself. The world tilts before it breaks. That's always how it happens. The air changes, the atmosphere tightens. People later describe a sense of wrongness, a feeling that they can't rationalize because they don't have language for it yet. Then, 6:01 arrives like a trap springing, and the voice of the movement is silenced. In the seconds afterward, reality becomes unrecognizable. Men point toward the rooming house. People scream. Someone runs toward King. Someone runs for help. Someone calls for an ambulance. The most haunting part of eyewitness memory is the futility, the desperate human refusal to accept finality. People try to hold him, they try to comfort him, they try to keep him present, but the world has already crossed a threshold. King is rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital. Doctors try to save him, but the injury is catastrophic. At 7:05 p.m., he's pronounced dead. Auden wrote of clocks, of the way time continues in the face of grief. That's what makes this moment unbearable. The minute hand keeps moving. And outside the hospital, outside Memphis, outside the South itself, America begins to ignite. And not metaphorically, literally.
Our dogs are family, and they deserve food that treats them that way. That's why Ollie makes meals with fresh, human-grade ingredients you can actually recognize. Chicken, beef, carrots, blueberries, spinach, no fillers, no byproducts, just real nutrition slow-cooked to keep your pup healthy and energized. Shinier coats, better digestion, more energy, and with 5 protein-packed flavors like beef with sweet potatoes or turkey with blueberries, your dog may be eating better than you. Every plan is customized to your dog's age, breed, and activity level, and delivered right to your door in perfectly portioned, easy-to-serve packs. Simple, fresh, and made just for them. Now here's how you can try it. Your dog's well-being starts with their food, and that's why Ollie delivers fresh, human-grade food that your dog will love. Head to ollie.com/Ides. Tell them all about your dog and use code IDES to get 60% off your welcome kit when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a happiness guarantee on the first box, so if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/Ides and enter code IDES to get 60% off your first box. Most people can't name every financial account they have or what any of them are really worth. A 401k here, an old brokerage there, a few credit cards, maybe a forgotten savings account. It's a kind of financial fog, and it's costing people money. Monarch cuts through that fog. It's an all-in-one personal finance platform that brings your entire financial life together, cleanly, clearly, and instantly on your laptop or your phone. Link your accounts in minutes, see where your money's actually going, and take control of it. Monarch does the heavy lifting. smart categorization, powerful visuals, and planning tools trusted by professionals. It's been named Best Budgeting App of 2025 by the Wall Street Journal, Forbes Best App for Couples, and listed among CNBC's top fintech companies in the world. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code IDES at monarch.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code IDES.
Chapter 3. The Hour After. A nation doesn't break in one moment. It breaks in the minutes afterward, when the mind begins to grasp what the heart refuses to accept. At the Lorraine Motel, the scene becomes chaos. Shouting, running, hands trembling so badly they can't dial phones. People point across the street, people stare in disbelief. It's a human impulse to seek a direction for grief, to find a place to aim the horror. The official record will later emphasize the immediate response, how quickly law enforcement began to lock onto evidence, how the rifle was found abandoned, how a trail began to form. But first comes the oldest human reaction: shock. Shock is not dramatic. It's silence inside the body. It's the inability to process. It's the moment your mind protects you by refusing to understand. Then, as the news spreads, shock becomes something else: communal grief. And in America, communal grief, especially in 1968, doesn't stay quiet. It moves outward like fire. Within hours, riots erupt in cities across the country, not because people want destruction as entertainment, but because the country is exhausted. The assassination didn't occur in a vacuum. It landed inside a nation already swollen with anger, with disappointment, and with fear. The murder becomes an act of proof that even the most visible moral voice in America can be killed in public. It's difficult, from the distance of decades, to understand how raw that felt. But imagine living in a country where the promise of progress has become the oxygen that you breathe, and then the oxygen is suddenly removed. That is what April 4th does to millions of Americans. It's not only a grief event, it's a psychological rupture. And in that rupture, violence becomes language. Auden understood this human truth better than most, that tragedy alters the grammar of society. People stop speaking in the old way. The old assumptions become impossible to maintain. Auden wrote that in the face of catastrophe, the living must learn to live with the dead. But before that learning happens, society flails. It demands compensation that it can't name. On April 4th and the days that follow, America flails. Meanwhile, law enforcement begins the mechanics of the investigation. And now this is an angle that many narratives just rush through, but it matters because it reveals how quickly history becomes administration. Evidence is gathered, witnesses are questioned, the rifles recovered, fingerprints are analyzed. A suspect emerges. This is the official narrative, the quick conversion of national catastrophe into procedural action. That procedural action has a purpose beyond justice because it offers psychological containment. A suspect gives the public something to hold, something to hate, something to blame. In times of mass grief, a nation needs a villain not only for legal reasons, but for emotional survival. By April 5th, a manhunt is underway. The suspect named is James Earl Ray, a fugitive with a history of petty crime and prison escape. Not a political figure, not someone famous. The choice and announcement of the suspect itself becomes part of the national trauma. The idea that a man like King, an orator, a Nobel laureate, a moral giant, could be killed by someone so small and grimly ordinary. But this is one of the quiet horrors of history. Transformative events are often triggered not by titans, but by men who can vanish into the crowd. King's death doesn't stay in Memphis. It moves through radio and televisions, into kitchens, into churches and bars and factories. It becomes a communal scream. It becomes, for many Americans, the end of innocence, the moment belief in moral inevitability collapses. And then something else happens. A secondary transformation that also deserves more attention than it usually receives. Grief turns into legislative movement. The country, shaken, pushes through the Fair Housing Act. This is often presented as redemption, tragedy followed by progress. But it's more complicated than that. Legislation doesn't erase death. Reform doesn't, resurrect. Passing a bill in the wake of assassination is both meaningful and grotesque because it confirms the darkest bargain of political history. Sometimes power will only concede after blood. This is not to diminish the law. It's to expose the cruelty of the process that made it necessary. And there's a further angle, a deeper one. The assassination fractures the future of movements. Without King, the civil rights movement shifts. Grief changes leadership. Rage changes strategy. Hope becomes different. Some energy hardens, some become defensive. Some become cynical. And that's not moral failure. It's just human consequence. A movement is not merely ideas, it's people. And when you kill the person who holds the moral center, the movement must survive the wound. Auden wrote about the world continuing after tragedy as if nothing happened. Children skating, dogs barking, clocks ticking. That continuation isn't comfort, it's cruelty, because it forces the living to carry a grief too large for any one single body. The hour after King dies isn't simply aftermath. It is the birth of a new America, a nervous America, a darker America, a country that now knows, without theory or metaphor, that violence can just erase the future. And as the night of April 4th slides into April 5th, there's one question rising above all the others like smoke. Where's the guy who did this? So this doesn't end with closure, but it ends with pursuit, because the official narrative now demands the next phase. The hunt. Yes, the rifle has been recovered, and the suspect has been named. A man is running. And in part 2, we follow the pursuit out of Memphis, across state lines, across borders, into the moment a fugitive becomes the official answer to one of history's most devastating questions. W.H. Auden wrote that when someone dies, the world keeps going in a way that feels obscene. And that's the most realistic line about grief I think ever written, because after April 4th, hey, the sun rises, people eat breakfast, they start their cars, they turn on the radio, they drive to work, and yet something is gone that doesn't return. And in that absence, America becomes responsible for what it has lost. Not only a man, but an actual direction. Next week on the Ides of April, the manhunt, the capture, and the guilty plea that should have ended the story, except it didn't. Because closure is not a legal event, it's an emotional one. If you're enjoying this story, make sure you're following the Ides of April on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. And share it with someone who still believes that history matters, because it does. And explore the full EVO Creative universe at evocreative.com, or you can email me directly with any thoughts, suggestions, or your own stories at info@evocreative.com. And don't forget to check the show notes for great deals on amazing products from the great companies that still support long-form storytelling. The Ides of April is an EVO production, recorded live in Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. For the Ides of April, I'm Brandon Morgan, your writer and host.